Lena stood at the door, her hand trembling as she gripped the handle. Inside the house, the cheerful laughter of family blended with Christmas music playing softly from the speakers. She had prepared everything perfectly, from the twinkling lights on the tree to the rich, fragrant dishes laid out on the table. She had planned this dinner for so long, believing everything would unfold peacefully. But in this very moment, a painful truth was beginning to surface. The door opened, and instantly, silence fell over the room. Lena looked into James's eyes, her husband, then shifted her gaze to the woman standing beside him. A wave of icy cold surged through her chest, as if she had just been drenched in freezing water. It was Sophia, James's ex-girlfriend, the woman Lena had believed belonged to the past, someone who no longer had a place in his life. But now, standing right in front of her, she was part of the present, a present Lena had never prepared herself to face. "Hi," James said, his voice slightly awkward, trying to sound normal. Lena looked at him, her eyes cold. Every ounce of pain, suspicion, and helplessness she had endured over the past 3 months erupted in a single instant. Everything she thought she knew about her life shattered. All the effort, all the sacrifices, all the years they had spent together, all of it now felt like a lie. Sophia smiled, but in her eyes, Lena saw a challenge. She stepped into the house as if she belonged, as if she were an inseparable part of this family. Lena wondered if she had assumed Lena would be the obedient wife, someone who would quietly accept her presence in James's life without resistance. That feeling, an invisible yet powerful insult, surged within her. Lena forced herself to suppress her emotions, to hold on to her composure, even as a storm raged inside her. She walked into the living room, smiling at everyone as if nothing had happened, as if this were just another ordinary gathering. But deep inside, a tempest was building. She knew that everything was only just beginning. When dinner began, the tension was impossible to hide. Both James and Sophia tried to act natural, but Lena knew they were waiting for her reaction. They thought she would be weak, foolish enough to pretend she knew nothing, just to keep the peace in the family. But they were completely wrong. She was no longer the fragile woman they once knew. Lena looked at James as he raised his glass for a Christmas toast. "To family," he said with a smile. But to Lena, it was a smile full of deceit. She took a sip of wine, lifting her gaze toward him and Sophia. She saw everything more clearly than ever. The truths James thought she would never discover were now laid bare. "Yes, family," Lena murmured, her eyes as cold as ice, but perhaps not in the way you think. The entire room seemed to freeze as she continued speaking. "Did you really think I wouldn't know? Did you think I would stay silent and pretend everything was fine?" Her voice was not loud, but it was firm enough for everyone to hear. "Then you were wrong." People exchanged confused glances. First came silence, then a quiet sigh from James as he realized what was about to happen. Lena didn't need to say more. The photos, the messages she had gathered over the past weeks, the hotel receipts James had forgotten he paid using their joint account, everything was ready to be exposed. She didn't want to make a scene, but she could no longer remain silent. "I know everything, James," she said, looking straight into his eyes. "I've known for a long time, and I've been preparing for this day." Neither James nor Sophia could have imagined that this dinner would become a moment of truth. James stared at her, his face turning pale. You knew?" His voice faltered, stripped of all the confidence he once had. Lena did not answer. She took the photos from her wallet and placed them on the table, one by one, each piece of evidence she had collected, every trace of betrayal he could no longer deny. She looked at Sophia, whose eyes were now filled with worry, and then she smiled. Not a gentle smile, but the smile of someone who had won. "We're not going to talk about family anymore, because I've made everything clear," Lena said, her voice sharp. Everyone in the room fell silent, exchanging uneasy glances, not daring to move. The air was thick with tension that no one could conceal. And then, just when everyone thought Lena would let things pass quietly, she pulled back the curtain on the truth. She revealed that not only James, but Sophia as well, could not escape the consequences of their actions. Lena had prepared another shock, a truth no one had expected. And with every word she spoke, the confusion and shame became more evident on the faces of James and Sophia. Lena smiled, not the smile of a betrayed wife, but of a strong woman who had decided not to let her pain destroy her. She stood up and delivered her final words. "This is the end of the lies, and this is the beginning of my new life." Lena stood still in the living room, feeling as if time itself had stopped. Everything around her continued as normal, but in her mind, every image blurred, leaving only memories and waves of pain and humiliation. She had believed she had built a perfect life, a small family with James, the man she loved more than anything. But now, all she could see was ruin. She looked at James, yet no longer recognized him. The husband she once trusted had become nothing more than a liar, someone she could not bear to face for even another second. The truth is never easy to accept, and that was what Lena realized in this moment. 3 months ago, everything had still felt like a dream. She and James had celebrated their wedding anniversary in a warm, love-filled setting. She remembered that evening clearly, the two of them sharing a candlelit dinner, happiness surrounding them. It was the 7th time she had celebrated with the man she believed would walk beside her for the rest of her life. She had prepared everything perfectly: James's favorite meal, the green dress he once said made her look like an emerald, and all the promises they had exchanged over the years. But everything changed in a single moment, when she saw James's phone screen light up with a strange message. Victoria Hawthorne, a name Lena had thought was just an old friend of James, someone he claimed meant nothing. But the messages told a completely different story. Words of love, promises, and especially the kind of words that sounded like they were ready to start over. Just him and Victoria. That feeling, the sensation of her heart being torn apart, was something she never wanted to experience. She had never imagined she would find messages like those, messages filled with all the betrayal James had hidden for so many years. She could not believe her eyes as she read the words, "I love you, and I miss you," and especially the line, "We will always be together, don't worry." Those words had been written at times when she sat alone at home, hurting from losses she had never shared with him. Lena was not someone who was easily suspicious, but when those messages appeared, the truth began to unfold, and she could no longer hide her pain. She searched further through James's phone, opening every message, every photo she did not want to see, yet could not stop herself from looking. Photos of Victoria in revealing outfits, pictures of James and Victoria together at restaurants, their trips to hotels, everything felt like a slap to her face. And still she could not look away, even though each glance only deepened the pain. She remembered what it felt like to trust James, to believe he was the only one who would stay with her forever. But now, everything felt like a performance, a story she never wanted to be part of. The last messages, the promises, none of them held any meaning anymore. She did not know what to do, did not know how to move forward. All the love she once had for James suddenly dissolved like mist. And then, Lena decided she would not let James remain comfortable. She could not accept this betrayal, and she could not continue living in lies. She took a deep breath, emphasizing every word she was about to say. "James," she began, her voice firm and cold, "I know everything." The sentence hit him like an explosion. James looked at her, his face turning pale, unable to say a word. He had never imagined Lena would know everything, never believed she would have the courage to face him and expose the truth. "You thought I wouldn't know?" Lena continued, her voice rising, as if she had spent the last 3 months preparing for this very moment. "You thought I would just keep living in deception and pain without saying anything?" James stood frozen, his eyes empty, not knowing how to react. Sophia, the woman he had hidden all this time, stood beside him, her face drained of color. Lena turned to look at her and smiled coldly. "Both of you thought I was naive, didn't you?" She looked at them, and there was no need to say anything more. The photos, the messages, and the evidence were enough to reveal everything. The entire room sank into silence. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Only Lena's voice echoed, sharp and deliberate, each word cutting into them like blades. "This is the truth, James. You can't run anymore. We will never be a family again." And in that moment, Lena stood there, looking at James's face, her heart hollow. What she had believed to be love all these years was now nothing but shattered pieces that could never be mended. She felt as if she had just woken up from a dream, a dream she had painted herself, where everything was perfect, where love was the only thing holding them together. But now the truth could no longer be hidden. It laid bare everything she had never wanted to see. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, neither daring to speak. James remained there as if he still could not accept what Lena had just said. His face turned pale, his lips trembling slightly, yet no words came out. And Sophia, the woman Lena thought she had pushed out of her life, was now standing right in front of her. She looked at Lena, her eyes holding both a trace of fear and a hint of defiance. She stood there like a victor, but Lena knew things would not be that simple. "I know everything," Lena said again, her voice now as cold as ice. All the emotions she had suppressed for so long surged violently to the surface. She could not stand there and watch them anymore. She could not keep pretending that nothing had happened. It was enough. James lowered his head, as if he did not dare face her. He was no longer the strong man Lena had once loved, but now just a weak man who could not even utter an apology, who could not accept the reality he himself had created. Lena took a deep breath, trying to hold back the anger rising inside her. She looked at James, no trace of pity or love left in her eyes. "I've seen everything, James," she said, each word firm and deliberate. "The messages, the photos, everything. Did you really think I wouldn't know?" Her voice was not loud, but every word carried weight. She could not endure this any longer, and she no longer needed to. Everything was clear. She did not have to continue living in a relationship filled with lies and betrayal. She was strong enough to stand up, to face the truth, and bring it into the light. She turned to Sophia, a faint smile appearing on her lips, but it was not the smile of a victor. It was the smile of a woman who had seen the truth, who understood that she was never as weak as they had thought. "Did you think I would stay silent, just to let you walk into my life like this?" Lena said, her voice completely serious. "Did you think I would accept this betrayal and do nothing?" For the first time that evening, Sophia lowered her gaze. She could not meet Lena's piercing eyes, as if a light had suddenly been cast upon her, exposing every layer of deception. Lena felt a sense of release, not because she wanted them to suffer, but because at last she could face them without fear or hesitation. "James," Lena continued, her voice softer but steady, "you can't keep living in lies. You can't keep hurting me like this. I deserve a different life, a life without you." She turned to Sophia. "And you as well. Do you think you will have everything? In reality, you have nothing. You are just the other woman, someone who destroys another person's life." Now no one could escape the truth. James stood there, his arms hanging lifelessly, unable to look into Lena's eyes. He had lost everything, not only his wife, but also the respect and trust Lena had given him for so many years. Sophia, the person he once believed would be his salvation, was now nothing more than part of the past. Both of them felt the collapse closing in, but Lena gave them no chance to justify themselves. "You have nothing left to explain, James. Everything is already clear," Lena said, her voice firm, leaving no room for denial. She knew this was the moment to end it all. There was no turning back, no escape. Everything had gone too far to be saved. You will have to face the consequences of your actions. And you, Sophia, I don't need to say anything more about you. Lena turned away, no longer looking at them. She felt a strange sense of relief, not because she had won, but because she had chosen to stand up for herself, for her own dignity. For the first time, she truly felt strong, stronger than at any point in her marriage. As she walked out of the room, Lena felt as if she had cast off a heavy burden. She no longer had to live in fear. Everything had been exposed. She had taken back control of her life, and no one could make her feel weak again. She did not regret her decision. The truth, no matter how painful, would ultimately set her free. She had begun a new journey, one without lies, without betrayal. And this time, Lena would never allow anyone to destroy her life again. Lena sat quietly on the sofa, gazing toward the window where the sunlight was slowly fading. The numbness still lingered, as if her heart no longer belonged to her. Everything had changed in a single moment, when she chose to open her heart and trust James. Now his betrayal felt like a wound that could never heal. Every morning when she woke up, she still could not believe that her life had fallen into this situation. But there was one thing Lena knew more clearly than ever. She could not continue living in the shadow of lies. Everything she had felt from James over the years had now become nothing more than faint memories, like a part of the past she needed to bury. The truth was too clear and too painful. James had betrayed her, but more importantly, he had disrespected the trust she had given him. Lena knew she had to act, not only to protect herself, but to take back control of her life. She stood up, feeling as if she had regained a piece of the strength she once thought she had lost. She was no longer the weak woman waiting for empty apologies from James. She had planned everything in advance, step by step, and now it was time to act. Lena refused to continue living in silence, letting James and Sophia believe she would simply accept the betrayal and pain without doing anything. She was not that kind of person. With firm determination, Lena picked up her phone and reopened the messages and photos she had saved from days before. Each time she looked at them, a storm stirred inside her. She had seen everything James and Sophia had tried to hide, the messages, the compromising photos James believed she would never discover. But now, those pieces of evidence were the key to exposing the truth. Lena knew she could not let this pass quietly. She would not allow James and Sophia to believe they could destroy her life without consequences. She called a lawyer she had carefully researched, someone known for winning complex divorce cases. Her name was Vivian, a sharp and decisive woman whom Lena trusted to help her turn the situation around. Vivian answered the call, and after a brief conversation, Lena could feel her determination and deep understanding. "I will help you get back what you deserve," Vivian said, her voice firm with commitment. "We are not just going to divorce. We are going to make him understand that every action has consequences." Lena nodded without speaking, but inside her, a fire had ignited. She would not simply walk away from James. She would make him take responsibility. She would make sure this betrayal would not only remain a painful memory, but also become a costly lesson for both him and Sophia. In the following days, Lena was no longer the weak woman James believed she would always be. She began to reorganize everything, not only in her life, but also in her mind. Every action she took was carefully calculated, each step part of a strategy. She hired a private investigator to monitor James and Sophia's activities, ensuring she would not miss anything that could benefit her in the legal battle ahead. Lena spent time learning more about her rights in the event of a divorce. She researched the assets she could claim, and especially the money James had spent on this extramarital relationship. She did not only want freedom, she wanted to make sure James could never deceive her again in any form. Meanwhile, James had no idea that Lena was quietly putting everything into motion. He believed she would remain silent and continue their life with forced normalcy. Each day, he returned home, seeing no sign of change in Lena. But she knew she was preparing for a moment he would never expect. 1 week before the Christmas party, Lena received information from the private investigator that James and Sophia had gone on vacation together, once again using Lena's family money to pay for the trip. This only strengthened her resolve. She could not allow them to continue living in lies and taking everything she had built. "I am not the only victim in this," Lena thought, her eyes burning with determination. "I will make them pay." Christmas was approaching, and everything had been perfectly arranged. Lena had prepared everything for the confrontation she had been waiting for. She did not just want to end this relationship. She wanted it to end in a way that James and Sophia would never forget. She had planned to reveal the truth, not only within this family, but to society as well. She would make everyone see them for who they truly were. Deep inside, a firm belief grew within Lena. Revenge was not. Lena stood by the window, the faint light of the morning, slowly giving way to the darkness left behind by the night before. She could hear the rush of car wheels speeding along the road outside, but inside her, everything seemed to stand still. The cold, hollow feeling still clung to her, like a heavy shadow she could not shake off. What she once believed to be a solid foundation in her life had now become nothing but chaos, a collapse beyond repair. But she was no longer the weak woman she used to be. She knew she had to act. She could not allow the pain to consume her any longer. For the first time in the past 3 months, Lena felt as if she could breathe again. That feeling, though faint, burned quietly inside her like a steady flame. She no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance, no longer as someone who had been deceived. She had a plan, and this time, no one could stop her. Lena took a deep breath and turned to look at her desk. Papers were scattered across it, plans she had been working on for weeks. Every step had been carefully calculated. She was no longer the broken woman waiting for James to change. She had gathered enough evidence, and now it was time to force everything into the light. Lena opened a file filled with the proof she had spent days collecting, the messages, the photos, the hotel receipts, and the documents from the private investigator she had hired. Everything was ready. I am not the only victim in this, she thought, her hands tightening into fists. James and Sophia will have to pay. To Lena, revenge was not something irrational. It was an awakening. She did not need to win back James's love because that love no longer existed. But she needed to reclaim her life, to prove that she was not someone easily broken, not someone who could live forever in lies and wounds. Lena continued completing the final steps of her plan. She had found one of the top lawyers in the city, someone known for helping betrayed women reclaim their rights in divorce cases. Vivian, the sharp and decisive lawyer Lena had met several times, had assured her that she would not face this battle alone. Vivian understood Lena, and more importantly, she understood exactly what Lena needed. When Lena walked into Vivian's office for the last time, before the confrontation began, she could clearly feel the change within herself. She no longer felt fear or anxiety. For too long, she had watched James and Sophia continue their lives in deception. Now, with the evidence in her hands and the plan she had built, everything was ready to bring them down. We are not just going to divorce, Vivian said as they sat across from each other, the dim light from the window casting soft shadows. We will make sure everything he has done is exposed. Lena looked at Vivian, a powerful sense of resolve rising within her. She knew she would not simply be the betrayed woman. She would be the one forcing them to face the consequences. Not only James, but Sophia as well would have to pay for what they had done. Lena nodded, feeling fully prepared for whatever lay ahead. Throughout the following week, Lena devoted her time to preparing everything she needed. She went through every part of the documents, discussing in detail with Vivian the legal strategies and the assets she had the right to claim. It would not just be a divorce. She would make sure that James and Sophia could never continue their lives as they once imagined. She would take back her power, not only in this marriage, but in her life. In the days that followed, Lena continued to monitor James's every move. Although he still lived as if nothing had changed, she knew everything was about to end. James had no idea what Lena was preparing. He could not see what was waiting for him. He still believed she would quietly endure and accept the betrayal in silence. But he was wrong. Lena did not just want freedom, she wanted them to understand that every action carries consequences. The money James had spent on Sophia, the vacations they had taken together, all of it was evidence she would use to make him face the truth. Lena was no longer the fragile woman they believed her to be. She was strong, resilient, and unafraid to confront reality. As Christmas Eve drew near, Lena could feel the tension building in the air. Everything had been prepared. At the right time, on the right day, she would begin the confrontation. Just when James believed he had won, Lena would make him realize that revenge was not about pain, it was about liberation. She would not allow James to continue underestimating her. She would show him that when a woman decides to stand up, no one can stop her. On that day, as she looked back at everything she had done, Lena no longer felt fear. All she felt was a strange sense of relief, as if everything was finally coming to an end, and this would be the beginning of a new life. She was ready. Lena stood in the living room, the glow of Christmas lights shimmering across her face. What she felt now was nothing like any Christmas party before. Normally, this night would be a time for reunion, for gathering together and enjoying the warmth of family. But tonight was different. She was no longer the gentle wife, no longer the one who quietly endured and gave in. Today, Lena was the one in control of this battle, the one who would force everyone to face the truth they had tried so hard to hide. She glanced at the clock. 9 in the evening. Right on time. Everything was ready. And now it was time to act. She had prepared everything with meticulous attention to every detail. The food was beautifully arranged on the table, scented candles were lit, creating a warm and elegant atmosphere. Everything appeared normal, but deep inside, Lena knew this would be a night no one would ever forget, a night when every truth would be exposed. She turned and looked at the family photo on the table, a picture she had kept for many years. In it, she and James were smiling together, happy. She remembered those days, when life seemed perfect, when she believed she had found the man who would stay by her side forever. But now, that photo was nothing more than a painful reminder of the betrayal she had endured. The front door opened, and James walked in. He looked at her with a strange expression, as if he could not understand why Lena had changed. She still wore a smile, but it was not the smile of a happy wife. It was the smile of someone who had lost all faith, yet found strength in the harshness of the truth. She was no longer easy to hurt. She was ready. "You're home?" Lena said, her voice gentle, yet carrying an unmistakable chill. James responded awkwardly, "Yeah, I just got back. Everything okay?" "Don't worry, everything is ready," Lena replied, her gaze briefly passing over Sophia, who stood quietly near the doorway. Sophia said nothing, only looked at Lena with a challenging stare. She showed no sign of concern. On the contrary, the confidence on her face only made Lena more determined. She believed she would have everything, that she could step into Lena's life without facing any consequences. But tonight, everything would be different. As everyone sat down at the table, Lena silently observed. James was trying to create a cheerful atmosphere, trying to cover the tension with casual stories and light laughter. But Lena knew tonight was not about trivial conversations. She could not continue pretending nothing had happened, could not keep standing outside her own life. She had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Just a few minutes later, as the dinner was reaching its peak, Lena stood up, cutting through the conversation. She looked at James once more, then turned to Sophia. All eyes in the room were now on her. "We have something that needs to be addressed," Lena said, her voice firm, no trace of weakness left. "What are you doing?" James asked, his voice uneasy. Lena did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched every reaction from him, every subtle movement from Sophia. She could feel the confusion and unease beginning to show on their faces. "I don't think you fully understand," Lena said calmly. She gently pulled out a folder she had prepared earlier and placed it on the table in front of James. "I think you should see what I found." She flipped through the pages, the photos, the evidence she had gathered, the secret messages between James and Sophia, the intimate pictures of them together, the hotel receipts Lena had obtained through the investigator. Each sheet hitting the table felt like a slap across both their faces. The room fell into silence, broken only by James's uneven breathing and the panic in Sophia's eyes. James looked up, his face pale. You knew everything?" he stammered. Lena nodded, her eyes cold as ice. "Not only do I know, I have enough evidence to prove it." She looked straight into his eyes without hesitation. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I wouldn't look into it?" She turned to Sophia without the slightest hesitation. "And you, Sophia? Did you think you could deceive me without consequences?" Sophia said nothing, lowering her head, unable to meet Lena's gaze. A sense of release rose within Lena. She did not want to hurt them further, but she knew she had to do this to free herself and to make them understand that not everything could be buried in silence. This is no longer. Lena stood by the window, looking out at the sky as it slowly darkened. The stars had begun to appear in the night, but inside her, there was not a single light to guide her. She did not know what to call this feeling, but it was certainly not happiness or relief. It felt like watching a part of her life being torn apart and dissolving into fragments that could never be put back together. What she had done, what she had started. Everything was tangled, complicated, and full of challenges. But Lena knew this was the only way she could begin again. She turned to look at the table, where the evidence she had carefully prepared still lay. The divorce papers she had placed there the day before were now just one part of this painful game. James had signed them, and now she could move forward. Yet a part of her still felt choked with emotion, as if she could not escape the past, no matter how hard she tried to leave it behind. James's betrayal was not just a wound to her heart. It was a psychological shock that shattered everything she had once believed in. Lena took a deep breath and walked to her desk. She reopened the documents, the call records, the emails she had gathered over time. Every piece of her life's puzzle carried its own pain. But now she no longer felt any pity for herself. Instead, there was a powerful determination, a strength she had never imagined she could possess. Everything she had gone through, every loss she had endured, was now part of the past, and she was slowly rebuilding her life from those ruins. As Lena stepped outside, the cold evening air brushed against her face, bringing a faint sense of comfort. She paused for a moment, feeling each chill gust pass through her. In her mind, the images of James and Sophia, the ones who had betrayed her, still lingered. But now, she no longer saw them as the people who had hurt her. She saw them as part of the past, a part she would never return to. That feeling, the sense of being set free, was only just beginning to take shape. Lena was no longer a weak woman, no longer the person James believed would bow her head and accept pain without resistance. She had stood up, and nothing could make her step back. Over the past months, she had learned an important lesson. Forgiving herself mattered most. And sometimes, revenge was not about destroying others, but about rebuilding yourself and starting over. The next day, Lena received a call from Vivian. She could sense something in Vivian's voice, something strong and full of conviction. "Lena," Vivian said, "we are going to take a very different path. We will not stop at divorce. I have prepared everything. We are going to make the truth about James and Sophia public. He cannot continue living in this lie." Lena said nothing, only nodded. Inside her, her determination grew stronger once again. She no longer needed to stand still and endure. She would do everything not only to protect her rights, but also to ensure that James would be held accountable for his actions. This betrayal would not be ignored. And Sophia, the one who entered as the third person, would not escape the consequences so easily. Lena did not want to do all of this out of revenge. She was not someone who wished to hurt others, but sometimes in life, people only understand when they are forced to face painful truths. Lena knew that if she did nothing, James would never realize the consequences of what he had done. That day, as Lena sat across from Vivian in a quiet cafe, she felt as if she was stepping into a real battle. Everything had been carefully prepared. There was nothing left to wait for. "We will not stop at reclaiming your assets," Vivian said, her eyes filled with determination. "We will make James and Sophia face consequences they cannot avoid. You will not have to endure this alone." Lena felt strength in Vivian's words. This was not just a legal battle. It was a fight to reclaim power over her own life. She could not let James continue to underestimate her. She could not keep living in the past. She had to move forward, to be strong, and to make them see that she was not someone who could be defeated. When the meeting ended, Lena felt a part of herself had been set free. She was no longer the weak woman waiting for an apology from James. She had learned to stand up for herself, and she would never allow anyone, not James, not Sophia, to hurt her again. As everything unfolded, Lena realized she was not just someone who had suffered. Lena stepped into a room filled with light, yet inside her, everything still felt like a dark veil covering every step she took. She could feel the quiet waves brushing against her mind, but deep within, the pain refused to fade. 3 months had passed since she faced the truth about James and Sophia, yet the sense of loss remained, lingering like an unhealed wound. Still, Lena knew she was no longer the weak woman waiting for forgiveness. She had moved through that pain, and now she had only one goal: to fight for justice. She sat down in the familiar armchair in her study, the place where she used to spend hours planning her work or writing down her thoughts. But today, she wrote nothing. She simply looked out the window, where soft sunlight filtered through the trees. Everything seemed peaceful, but inside Lena, that calm was only a disguise. She knew that tonight there would be no more peace. Tonight, she would do things she had never imagined. Tonight, she would make James and Sophia pay for what they had done. Over the past days, she had not stopped thinking about her actions. She had done everything she could to reclaim her life. She had gathered evidence, met with her lawyer, arranged everything to ensure that when the confrontation came, she would not just stand by. But throughout that time, One question kept haunting her: whether she was strong enough to face James again, whether she could keep moving forward while everything around her was still entangled in the past. Lena did not answer those questions. She no longer needed to. She had already decided. This decision was not just about revenge, it was about herself. She could not continue living in pain, could not keep holding on to lies and distant hopes. She was strong enough to understand that revenge was not about hurting others, but about making them face what they had done. When she lifted her gaze to the documents on the table, a faint smile crossed her lips. These were what she had prepared all this time, and now it was time to bring them into the light. The evidence she had collected, the email exchanges, the messages James believed would never be discovered, all of it was exactly what she needed to prove his betrayal. Lena did not need to cry or regret anything. She did not need to hold on to any emotions anymore. Tonight, she would show James and Sophia that the truth always finds a way to surface. She stood up and picked up her phone. On the other end was Vivian, her lawyer. After discussing the next steps, Lena felt a strange sense of calm. She was no longer worried about what would happen next. Everything had been arranged. She had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to end it all. Everything began in the early evening when James returned home. He had no idea that Lena was fully prepared for this confrontation. She stepped out of her study and saw him standing at the door, his expression puzzled, as if he did not understand what was happening. He smiled, but Lena did not return it. "I've prepared everything for dinner, James," she said, her voice gentle yet sharp. "I think we need to talk." James hesitated before stepping inside, saying nothing. Lena led him into the living room, where everything had been carefully arranged. The chairs around the table were set, but instead of a warm dinner, the atmosphere was filled with tension. Lena looked into James's eyes, with no trace of weakness or compromise. She knew exactly what she had to do. "When I found out everything, I didn't know how to face you," Lena began, her voice lowering. "But now I do. I don't need to cry. I don't need to break down anymore. The truth is all I need." She took out the photos, the messages, and every document she had kept hidden. These pieces of evidence stood as undeniable accusations. "You and Sophia," Lena said, each word firm and serious, "we are not going to keep living in lies anymore. You may not want to face the truth, but now everything is clear." She looked straight into James's eyes without a trace of sympathy. "There is nothing left for us, James. No more deception. This is where it ends." James stood frozen, unable to say a word. He no longer had the ability to justify or deny anything. He knew Lena was right. The truth could not be denied, and what he had done could not be undone. But Lena did not need him to admit fault. She only needed him to understand that it was over. Lena felt lighter than ever before. She was no longer worried about what would come next. She had stood up, faced everything, and no longer felt afraid. Her strength did not come from destroying others, but from reclaiming control over her own life. She knew that no one could hurt. Lena stood by the window, the fading light of dusk slipping through the curtains and resting gently on her skin. Yet in her eyes burned a fire that could not be extinguished. Time could not erase the wound inside her, but it had made her stronger. She once believed she would never survive the betrayal of James and Sophia, but now she understood that the pain had awakened a strength within her she had never known. That day, when everything seemed to have settled, Lena found herself facing an important decision. She had all the evidence she needed. She had prepared everything to expose James and Sophia, yet a part of her still wished for things to end peacefully. She did not want to continue living in hatred and pain, but was forgiveness the right path, or simply a form of weakness before those who had betrayed her? She shook her head, reminding herself that she was not weak. She was strong enough to never allow anyone to ruin her life again. Just a few weeks ago, she had been drowning in sorrow, but now she knew exactly what she wanted and who deserved to remain in her life. Lena turned to look at the paper in her hand. It was the divorce document she had prepared earlier. She had spent many days thinking about this decision. Even though she knew it was the right step, it was far from easy. She had loved James with all her heart, but now that love was nothing more than shattered fragments. She let out a quiet breath and placed the paper on the table. Tonight, she would make her final decision. Tonight would be the turning point of her life, not only in her relationship with James, but in how she saw herself. She could not keep living in the past, in old wounds. She could not allow pain to continue controlling her. When the doorbell rang, Lena flinched slightly. James had returned. She turned to look at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing for him. Her heart was steady now, no longer overwhelmed by emotion. She no longer belonged to the past. James stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over her before stopping. "Lena, we need to talk." His voice carried a hint of anxiety, as if he were searching for a chance to make amends. But she had heard those words too many times. Apologies were just a cover, a way for him to continue living as before without facing the consequences. Lena did not respond immediately. She simply stood there, looking at him. Everything seemed to pause in that moment. She could see the unease in James's eyes, but she no longer cared. She had made her decision. "You don't need to explain anything anymore, James," she said, her voice steady, without a trace of weakness. "We've reached the end of this. Everything is already clear." James opened his mouth as if to speak, then fell silent. Lena walked to the table, picked up the divorce paper, and placed it in front of him. "I don't need your explanations. What I need is an ending. I can't keep living in lies and betrayal like this." He said nothing, only stood there staring at the paper as if it were something distant and unreal. Lena looked into James's eyes one last time. There was still a faint glimmer in them, but she felt nothing except coldness. "You can sign it, or we go to court. I don't have time to wait anymore." James looked at her, the pride in his eyes now gone. He knew she no longer loved him, and that hurt more than any betrayal. But Lena felt no regret. She had suffered enough, and now it was time to take back control of her life. After a long silence, James signed the divorce paper Lena had prepared. She said nothing more, only looked at him one last time before taking the paper and placing it into an envelope. It was over. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to hold on to. "I wish you happiness in your new life," Lena said, her voice cold. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for." She turned away, never looking back at him again. James stood there, in a house that was no longer his home. He did not know what to do, did not know what to say. Lena had done everything she needed to do, and now she could begin again. Her life would no longer be tied to the past. She had chosen to move forward alone, with confidence and strength. As the door closed, Lena felt a gentle wave spreading within her. It was not joy, but it was peace. She was no longer the weak woman waiting for someone else to save her. She had saved herself, and that was what mattered most. She opened the window, letting the night air flow in. This was her moment to begin again. She was no longer afraid, no longer uncertain. Her life would not end here. Every step she took from now on would lead toward a future she chose for herself. Lena stood by the window, looking out at the distant streetlights blurred in the night. The cold air from outside slipped into the room, yet inside her, she felt a strange warmth. It was not the kind of peace she once knew, but the feeling of release after facing the truth. Everything was slowly coming to an end. She had signed the divorce papers, had decided to cut all ties with James, and now she stood between two worlds, the old one filled with pain, and the new one she would build for herself. Her hands tightened, as if she were creating a protective wall around herself. This feeling was not the freedom she had once dreamed of. It was not relief or joy. It was a quiet restlessness, a resilience she had found through months of suffering. Each day, Lena reminded herself that she had not only survived James's betrayal, but was now walking a path toward starting over. But the truth was, she did not know where to begin. She looked at the photos on the table, moments of family and happiness she once believed would last forever. James had once been everything to her. But now, it was all just a fading memory, like an old book she had finished and never wanted to open again. Lena knew that no matter what, she had to begin a new life, one without James, without those memories. She slowly sat down and began reflecting on everything she had done over time. Every step she had taken had a purpose, not just divorce, but liberation from pain, betrayal, and lies. She did not simply want to escape James. She wanted to be reborn. She wanted to rediscover herself through the harshness of the past. Her life now felt like a blank page. She did not know what she would draw on it, but she knew she would be the one to decide. Everything had changed. The months she spent living in pain and resentment were now behind her. She no longer wanted to be haunted by them. Lena wanted to step out of the shadow of the past to become the strong and independent woman she had always longed to be. The doorbell suddenly rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. She turned and saw a figure standing outside. It was Vivian, her lawyer. Lena opened the door and welcomed her in. She felt a sense of calm, even though everything was not yet finished. "Thank you for always being here, Vivian," Lena said softly. Her eyes filled with gratitude. "Lena, I know you are strong, but I also know that sometimes you have to walk through pain to move forward," Vivian replied, her voice warm and steady. "I have been following everything closely. The time has come. We will not stop at divorce. We will make James face the consequences he deserves." Lena nodded, feeling as if she had found a true ally. Vivian was not just her lawyer. She had become a companion throughout this painful journey. Lena could feel the strength and determination in Vivian's words. She was no longer alone. "Once again, thank you. I know I will not go through this alone," Lena said, her eyes shining with a newfound strength. Vivian looked at her and smiled. "You are not alone. We will make sure James and Sophia understand that their actions will not pass without consequences." Lena turned to look at the table, where the evidence still lay quietly. Every photo, every message, every receipt told a story. She was no longer the fragile woman in James's eyes. She was someone standing on the foundation of truth, and she would not allow anyone to take her power away again. Tonight, when everything was brought to light, everyone would see that she was not someone who would overlook betrayal. She did not know what came next in her life, but one thing was certain: she would not continue living as she once did. She would not hide in the shadows of the past. She would rebuild her life, step by step, even if it would not be easy. But once she had made her decision, nothing could stop her. Suddenly, Lena felt a surge of strength rise within her. Yes, she did not need to worry. She did not need to be afraid. Revenge was not about hurting others. It was about taking control of her own life. Lena stood in the spacious room, looking out through the window at the street where bright streetlights reflected off the rain still lingering on the pavement. A sense of emptiness had surrounded her for months. Everything in her life seemed torn apart, and now all she could see were the fragments of a shattered past. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, something had changed. She was no longer the weak woman, no longer afraid or trying to survive within lies. She had grown stronger. She had found her own strength again. Throughout this time, Lena had faced a storm of emotions. Pain, hurt, and loss had made her feel as though she could not endure any longer. But the truth was, she had survived it all. She no longer saw herself as a victim. She had stood up, and that alone made her feel stronger than ever before. On that day, when everything had unfolded according to plan, Lena felt a strange sense of peace. She had made the decision to divorce and had received legal confirmation. But more importantly, she had reclaimed control over her life. She had not only lost a husband, she had lost a large part of her life, a part she could never change. But that was the past. Lena understood that without those losses, she would not have become the person she was now. She remembered the final conversations with James, the sweet words he tried to say, but they were all lies. He never realized that all along, Lena had known everything. She had discovered his betrayal, and although her heart had broken, her mind was no longer weak. She knew exactly what she had to do. Revenge was not about returning pain. It was about reclaiming power, about showing them that she was not someone who could be easily broken. Lena kept moving forward, step by step. In the days after the divorce, she began to rediscover the things she had neglected. She returned to her passion for graphic design, expanded her business, and worked with new partners. Her life began to take on a rhythm of its own, one she had never imagined while she was still with James. Everything had changed, and she felt as if she was starting over, with a strength she had never expected. She remembered the nights she had secretly searched for evidence, the sleepless hours filled with doubt and pain. She had investigated everything on her own, uncovered the truth by herself, because she knew that if she did not do it, no one else would. That experience did not just help her confront James, It helped her realize that she was capable of standing on her own without depending on anyone. She received a message from Vivian. It was short but full of care. "Lena, everything is done. You did very well. I am proud of you." Those words filled Lena with a quiet warmth. Even though everything was over, she knew she had gone through a long and difficult journey, and now she stood firm, no longer trembling, no longer weak. She stepped outside, feeling the calm of the late night. There were no more sighs, no more lies. Everything had passed, and now it was time for her to live for herself. Lena no longer feared facing James or Sophia. Those things no longer mattered. She did not need to prove anything to anyone. She had already proven to herself that no matter how much pain she endured, she could still rise and begin again. What Lena felt now was not regret or pain, but peace and freedom. She no longer had to carry anything from those who had betrayed her. She had found her own path, a path no one could block. And no matter how life continued, she knew she would never return to the past. A part of her felt a new beginning unfolding, a new chapter opening in her life. But another part of her understood that wherever she went, her strength would guide her through every challenge. She could take control of her life, and no one could change that. Lena smiled and stepped forward without looking back. Everything in the past was gone, and now it was time for her to live her own life. Lena stood on the balcony, the yellow glow of streetlights reflecting on the rain-soaked ground after a light shower. The night breeze was cool, brushing through her hair, but it no longer carried a sense of coldness. Since she made the final decision to walk away from James and those who had betrayed her, every step Lena took was filled with determination and strength. She was no longer the weak woman from the past. The painful months had taught her that sometimes, in order to keep living, one must be strong enough to cut off relationships that no longer hold any value. She had done exactly that. She had risen from the depths of pain and betrayal, and now she felt as if she had been reborn, as though everything before had only been a nightmare she had finally awakened from. She could hear the echo of her own footsteps in the quiet space, step by step, moving closer to the freedom she had always longed for. Even though everything seemed to have ended, Lena knew that for a woman like her, nothing ever truly ends completely. She had fought a battle not only against those around her, but also within herself. And now she stood at a new crossroads, on a completely different path that she had opened with her own hands. Over the past days, Lena had slowly begun to heal. She spent more time on her work, on the passions she had once set aside during her life with James. She started expanding her graphic design company, seeking new partners and new opportunities. She also reconnected with old friends, people she had once neglected while being consumed by her family life. Now, everything was different. Lena no longer needed to please anyone, no longer needed to live according to anyone's expectations. She had learned that to find happiness, she had to live true to herself. One early morning, as she stepped into her office and looked at the design projects laid out on her desk, she felt a strange sense of excitement. Every illustration, every logo, every piece of design felt like a reminder that she was rebuilding her life, step by step. She no longer felt lost in betrayal or trapped in the pain of the past. She no longer saw herself as a failure. Lena was succeeding in her own way. That same morning, she received an unexpected call. It was Vivian, the lawyer who had stood by her throughout this journey. Vivian informed her that the case regarding James and Sophia's betrayal had been submitted to the court. Lena could not help but feel a sense of relief hearing those words. She knew that although she had signed the divorce papers and cut ties with the past, holding James and Sophia accountable for their actions was still an important part of her journey toward justice. "Lena, you've done very well. This is only the first step in your fight, but I believe you are ready to keep moving forward. And no one can stop you now," Vivian said, her voice filled with support and confidence. Lena smiled softly. "Thank you, Vivian. I don't know what I would have done without you." She no longer saw James and Sophia as enemies she needed to hate. Now they were simply lessons. The wounds had healed, and they no longer caused her pain. She had overcome them. Lena had learned how to stand on her own, to be independent and fearless. She understood that true freedom comes from letting go of the burdens of the past, and she had done exactly that. That day, Lena decided to visit a small cafe she used to frequent when she was still with James. She did not go there for memories, but to feel the change within herself. The cafe, with its rich aroma of coffee and its peaceful atmosphere, had now become a place where she could find calm. As she sat down, holding a warm cup in her hands, she felt as if she was starting everything over again. A sense of freedom, unbound, no longer afraid of things she could not change. As she sat there, Lena began to understand the true meaning of life. It was not about chasing perfection or seeking validation from others, but about being true to herself. Sometimes life cannot change what has already happened, but we can choose how to respond and how to move forward. And Lena had chosen strength, chosen to face everything she had been through in order to build a new life for herself. On her way home, Lena did not look back at the past. She felt as though she had let go of all her worries, all the old wounds. She was living for herself now. Every new day was an opportunity to rediscover who she was, to build a future she had created with her own hands. When she opened the door and stepped into her home, now a place where she lived alone with no one to share it with, she did not feel lonely. She felt free. She felt stronger than ever. There was no need to explain, no need to worry. She had taken control of her life, and that was what mattered most. The next day, as she walked into her office, a message from Lauren appeared on her phone screen. "Congratulations, Lena. You deserve all the best things. You did it. You've always been the strongest person I know." Lena let out a soft smile, set her phone down, and continued her work. She no longer needed to prove anything. She had already proven to herself that no matter how many challenges she faced, she could still stand strong and move forward. She had begun again, and nothing could stop her. Lena has walked through a journey filled with hardship and challenges, but she did not just survive. She rose stronger than ever before. Her story is proof of the strength that lies within each of us, of the ability to overcome pain and turn it into the driving force to build a new, brighter life. If you are facing difficulties or carrying pain, never forget that you too can rise and begin again. Do not let the past hold your future back. Every step you take, no matter how slow, brings you closer to the life you deserve. Believe in yourself and remember that strength is not the absence of pain, but the ability to face it and keep moving forward. If this story has inspired you, do not forget to share, leave a comment, and follow so you do not miss the next stories. Let us hear your story, and together we will rise, stay strong, and never give up.